quick intro. A lot of people met David at lunch, and he was here last year as well, so we're so happy to have you back.
What did we talk about last year?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think rivers. This year it's space. But
Rivers, okay.
So David is a volunteer educator with NASA, and he lives on the South Shore as a solar system ambassador with the Jet Propulsion Lab. So he presents topics that are related to American activities in space. Mm-hmm. His first book was American Astrophilately.
That's very, very close. So astrophilately, astro is like space, and philately is like collecting postage stamps. So telling the story, the exploration of space through postage stamps. Wow. Astrophilately, and you were very close.
Okay.
What a great topic.
So your first book, Astrophilately.
You did it.
The first 50 years.
Yeah.
So it was nominated for a National Book Award.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
But today it's all about SpaceX.
It's about SpaceX.
So,
all right, thank you.
carry on.
Patty, thank you. Thank you for inviting me back. Lunch was great, you know. And since I'm already here, we can talk about space flight. I'm David Ball. I'm a retired military guy who loves everything about aviation and space. And when I was growing up, you know, you're watching like the Apollo astronauts walking on the moon, and so that was so exciting. And when you were a young kid, that's what you wanted to be. You wanted to be an astronaut, you know. And when you put on your snow pants and that kind of stuff, you were really suiting up to go out the airlock, right? To go out into outer space. And then we had the space shuttle, and so for 135 missions, we just kind of went around the Earth over and over again. You know, it was kind of a space truck, and we built a space station, all that kind of stuff. That's great, but it's not as exciting as doing stuff that's new, stuff that's never been done before, and having all kinds of exciting places to go and things to do. And that's where we are now. So the shuttle flew from 1981 to 2000 and I don't remember what, but 135 missions, and they're now done with that, and now we're in a different era, and this is the era of commercial space. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, and that is, specifically about the leader in commercial space flight, and that's SpaceX. And my mother said to me, can you give your talk and not talk about Elon Musk? And what I told her was, I said that you can talk about Virgin Galactic, which is Richard Branson's company. You can talk about Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company. But you cannot talk about SpaceX without talking about Elon Musk. So we're going to talk about him and some other stuff. So I wanted to talk today about this company, SpaceX, and the whole birth of commercial space. So the year is 1903. I'm sure you all remember it like it was yesterday. And this is the Wright Flyer. It's the first airplane. And in the year 1903, the number of passengers who flew in 1903 was 0. Okay? And in the year 1953, 50 years later, the number of passengers that flew that year was 50 million. Okay? Now, in 2019, the number of passenger flights was 4.5 billion. Okay? Which is more than like half the people on the planet. Now, obviously, some of those people had to take like more than one flight, because maybe not everybody in Africa is flying every day. But the point is that we're 4.5 billion passenger flights in 2019. Okay, that number has not gone down since then. Okay, it's only gone up. So let's compare that to space flight. So I was born in 1959. In 1961, the number of people that had been in orbit or been in space was 2. That's it, 2 people in 1961. In 2021, the number of people that had ever been in space was 622. All right? Just a couple more, not really much. And by 2050, the Rand Institute says that the number of people that will go into space will be millions. Millions. So the question is like, what's changed? You know, we see with aviation, we go in 50 years and now there are 50 million people and now there are 4.5 billion people. And, you know, and with space, that like didn't happen. In 50 years, you know, there's still like less than 1,000 people that have been in space. And yet the technology is there. So what is it that's, you know, why is that different? And part of it, when you talk to Elon Musk and you ask him, why is space flight so hard? He says, well, building a rocket is not hard. I mean, it is rocket science, right? But he says, you know, we were doing that. The first rocket that went ostensibly into space was in 1942. Okay, I mean, doing this for a long time, all right? He says that's not what's hard. He says making it economically viable, very difficult to do, all right? Because imagine that you're in this airplane and you're in California and you buy a ticket to get on the plane and you fly from California to New York, and when you get off, they throw away the airplane, okay? Because they've used it. They've gone from California to New York, now they can throw it out. Well, that airplane costs $100 million, you know? So you have to divide the cost of that aircraft by the number of seats, right? So it costs $50 million to take a plane ride from California to New York. So how many people are going to do that? The answer is 622, I don't know. It's some small number. And the number of things that you can do in space, very limited, if you're going to throw away these jets. So now what happens with spacecraft? So this is the Saturn V. This is what we used to go to the moon in the late 60s and early 70s. It was 0% reusable. You throw the whole thing out. It cost $1 billion to send it, and you throw the whole thing out. So how often can you do that? And when we got to Apollo 17 and people said, well, you know, we've beat the Russians to the moon, why do we keep going there? Why are we spending $1 billion every time? To what, to get more rocks or take more pictures? It just, economically, it didn't make any sense because we're throwing the whole thing out. But when you talk to Elon Musk, he says, you know, the way that you make it economical is you reuse the whole thing, like the airplane, you know? You go that distance, but then you fuel it up and you send it back. So now you're just paying for the fuel. You're not paying the $100 million for the airplane. So it's the same thing with the spacecraft. This is the Starship, which is his latest rocket, and he can pick up 150 tons and make it reusable, or 250 tons if it's expendable, if it's not going to come back and be reused. So you can put tremendous amounts into orbit or into deep space. So a little bit about economics of spaceflight. So here's the Saturn V, which we used to go to the moon. First flew 1967. The cost is $750 million to put it up. So the cost to lift a pound off the surface of the Earth, put it into orbit, has always been about $10,000. Okay? So you think to yourself, well, you know, what sort of things make economic sense if it costs you $10,000 a pound to put something in orbit? Well, if you're doing like crystal growth or stuff for new cancer drugs or something, you know, maybe that kind of stuff makes sense. But most of the kinds of things you'd want to do doesn't make any sense at all. You know, so to lift an astronaut, okay, and say an astronaut weighs 200 pounds, for the Saturn V, it was $2.5 million for the seat, all right? A lot of money. Well, the Soyuz, which is the Russian version of this, was $8 million a seat. The space shuttle, nearly $30 million a seat. And the reason that the shuttle is so much more expensive is because, you know, it was doing so many other things other than just lifting that seat up into space. It was this whole big space truck. But you can see a ton of money, right? Way too much money. And so what SpaceX is doing is they're driving down the price to put a pound into orbit. So if it starts out at $10,000, he says, you know, we could make it, instead of $10,000, we could make it $1,000. He could make it like 90% cheaper. So here's the Saturn V. It's the astronaut is $2.5 million. Here's the Falcon. This is a Falcon 9, and here it is. And now the seat costs $1 million, and in the Falcon Heavy, it's $500,000. So all of a sudden, we're driving down these prices, and all kinds of economic things are going to happen if it doesn't cost you as much to go to orbit. So one of the things is communication satellites. So, we start out, if we want to communicate with one place to another, you have a wire and you run current through it, or you run data through it, or something like that. And so you got a whole bunch of wires. You got to lay a whole bunch of cables, right? Well, now we have fiber optics, all right? But the cost for fiber optic cables in the United States to transition from 4G, which is a fourth generation of stuff, to 5G, is $150 billion. That's how much it costs to upgrade, so that you can stream the Super Bowl faster or something like that. $150 billion, that's what it costs. Unless you could really cheap put a whole bunch of satellites up into space, and Musk says he can do the whole thing for $10 billion. Okay? All kinds of possibilities start happening if you can get the economics right. So from London to New York by fiber, it's 12,800 kilometers, and it takes 63 milliseconds, some small little chunk of time, to send this signal. Well, he has this constellation, he calls it Starlink. It's a bunch of satellites that he puts up in space. And for Starlink, you could put them in two different places. You could put them in a geostationary orbit that is far away from the Earth, let's say 22,000 miles away, okay, and it's orbiting around. Or you could put it like really close, like 500 miles into space. Now, the advantage to having it in the close orbit is the data goes back and forth a little bit faster, because at the speed of light, you don't have to go like 22,000 miles and then come back. So that's kind of nice, having it in close. But the other thing is, when it's in close, then they degrade and they burn up, and you have to launch more satellites. So on the one hand, if you put it like way the heck out there, you'd only have to put out a couple of satellites. But this guy launches so many satellites, I'm not going to say that he doesn't care, but I will tell you that it makes economic sense for him to be putting them in low Earth orbit, and that's what he does. So, has anyone ever heard of high-frequency trading? Okay, so in the stock market, it used to be you'd have the trading floor. We're on Wall Street, and you've got these clerks, and they've got these pieces of paper, and they're going, "I'll buy that stock." Nowadays, most of this stuff is actually done by computers. You got these enormous computers, and they're, instead of taking a position in a company where you buy some stock and you hold it for a while, and then you decide to sell it. What they do is they jump in and out of the market. They see that the stock is going up today, and they jump in, and then they jump back out. And sometimes they'll jump in and out like within a second. And that kind of seems kind of crazy. I mean, they do this stuff even faster than a human being could even realize what's going on. Well, high-frequency trading, whatever you think of that, I will tell you that wouldn't it be incredible if you're doing high-frequency trading and you were the only person who could do that trading as fast as anybody on the planet? So if you had the fastest high-frequency trading, then you could make the most amount of money. So who has the fastest way of doing that trading? Starlink, Elon Musk. So Starlink is 20 milliseconds faster than other data transfer methods. And so a whole bunch of the financial world is going to be going over to Starlink because they're able to do high-frequency trading faster. So let's talk about rockets. for the last 50 or 60 years, there isn't anybody who builds the whole thing, okay? It's a whole bunch of prime and subcontractors and sub-subcontractors. So you've got Northrop Grumman, and then you've got United Launch Alliance, and then you might have Lockheed Martin, and they all, they work together, they put together a proposal, and
It's your own mother. What are you going to do?
can I introduce my mother, my mom and my dad? Normally I'd throw them out, but since it's my mom, you can't really do that. So, so anyhow, you've got all these different players that have to work together and synchronize and things like that, unless you have this. So. Yeah. You can only get one mother. You don't get to choose who it is, okay? This is not my fault. All right. So I want to introduce you. This is Bob and Doug. They're test pilots. They're NASA astronauts. And they were the first to go on a commercial spacecraft. They went to the International Space Station. And so they flew, in the SpaceX rocket. But what I want to show you that I think is absolutely fascinating is look what they're wearing. Okay, it looks like they're wearing like penguin suits or something. I mean, they're in these futuristic spacesuits. Okay, these spacesuits are made by SpaceX. All right. Now, in the whole history of manned spaceflight in the United States, the only people that have ever made spacesuits are B.F. Goodrich and David Clark and ILC Dover. Those are the only people that have ever done it. I mean, it's incredibly hard. Those are the only people that have ever done it, okay, except for SpaceX. All right. So here's Bob and Doug, and they're in their SpaceX spacesuits. All right. So what they do is they get into this car. Okay? Now, this is an electric car. It's a Tesla, and it's made by, the SpaceX people. So there's never been anybody who's made a spacesuit that's also built an electric car, okay? But that's what's happening here, all right? So they get into this car, and they drive out to this. This is the Falcon 9, okay? The Falcon 9 is the booster, okay? So most of the energy to get you up into space is the booster. And then here you got a second stage and you've got a spacecraft on top. But there isn't anybody who's ever made a booster who's also built a spacesuit or a car, all right? But that's what they're doing. They're going out to the Falcon 9, all right? Now, when they get to the Falcon 9, they get into the Dragon. Now, no one's ever built a spacecraft who's also built the booster, who's also built the spacesuit, who's also built the electric car that got them there, all right? But this is mission control, all right? Now, there's never been a mission control other than NASA's mission control, right? But this is the mission control in Hawthorne that is, dealing with their spacecraft and their booster and their car and their spacesuit. It's all SpaceX. They're doing the whole thing, all right? And that's just the beginning of what they're doing. Now, there are other people in the space business, okay? Here's Boeing. They've got their Starliner. And this is Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company. These are charitably called also-rans, okay? So now Boeing has been in the aviation business since 1912, okay? And the people that built the large pieces of the Saturn V to get us to the moon was Boeing, all right? So, they've been in the aviation space business forever. And they've built this Starliner capsule, and Bob and Doug, no, actually it wasn't Bob and Doug, it was Suni Williams and Butch, Butch Cassidy. No, it wasn't Butch Cassidy. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid took this up to the space station, and they had problems taking it up there. Some of the thrusters weren't quite working. They were able to dock it But NASA decided, you know what? It's a little bit on the dicey side. We're going to send the thing home automated, and we'll have you guys stay up here, and you can take the next spacecraft to come back. Well, they're there, but they're going to come home this month, and they're coming back on a Dragon, which I'm sure Elon Musk loves because he's competing against these guys, and he's like, no, I'll rescue them. It's fine, you know. And here's Blue Origin. Blue Origin started at the same time as SpaceX. You know, they're both 25-year-old companies. These guys are the ones that have the New Shepard, which is a suborbital tourist kind of thing. You know, they sent William Shatner up into space. That was kind of cool. And they're trying to compete with SpaceX. They have something called New Glenn, which is kind of like the same size as the SpaceX one. And they sent that up, their first one, just in the last month or so. And the booster ended up blowing up. The capsule, I think, got up to orbit, but they weren't able to retrieve the booster. It disintegrated. So these guys are definitely also RANs, and like not even in the same ballpark. I mean, they've been lapped several times. So there are a whole bunch of these like SpaceX rockets. Like this is the original Falcon, the version 1, and this is the Super Heavies. These won't get reused. They'll end up burning up, but they're for taking really large payloads that have to go really far. And you can see some of them have Dragon. These are manned ones, and the ones that have these fairings are aerodynamic, so that you can put like a satellite in there, and you lift it up into space. The fairings fall away, and then you can like send the satellite off. So in SpaceX, they have two terms that are really useful to know, and it explains a lot about who they are. One is RID and one is RUD. So RID is a rapid iterative design or development. What they do is originally, when Musk was thinking about doing this space stuff, the people in the industry said to him, well, you got to get really super high-tech workers, and you need to work in titanium and wrapped composites and things like that. Very high-tech, very custom-built artisan kind of spacecraft. And he looked at that and he said, well, how do I learn from that? You know, you're going to make this super perfect thing, and you know, then you're not going to want anything to happen to it. And he says, well, why don't we just hire some guys that know how to use sheet metal, and we'll just build stuff out of stainless, you know? And people are like, well, you can't really just hire welders to, you know, build these, you know, these little silos and send them off. But that's what he does, okay? So this rapid iterative process is a lot cheaper than doing like what Boeing does. When Boeing built their spacecraft, you know, they lovingly put it together, and it took them a decade. And the same thing with Blue Origin or with NASA. I mean, they are
quick and dirty.
they don't permit themselves the luxury of failure. Okay, failure is not an option. Okay, for these companies that are building these these incredibly expensive kinds of things. But with Musk, he looks at it very differently. He says, we need to do this cheaply, and I want to learn every time we do it. So we send the thing up. It's telemetered, so it's got all kinds of telemetry that's coming down, and you're learning lots of stuff. And when he puts up the next rocket the next month, that rocket is not the same rocket. It's got all different kinds of changes. If some part of it like burned through, he's beefing that part up. Or if this part looked like it stood up really, really well, could we like shave a little bit off of that side? So he's learning a tremendous amount. It's a very learning organization.
Is it Musk himself, or is people around him the real brains?
Well, it's some of both. It's some of both. I will tell you that when I've seen interviews, long-form interviews, like where he's giving somebody a tour, and that person is an expert, and they're talking to him, Musk can hold his own on any subject. the details about the rocket engine, the reason why they're moving in this direction with their business. He is every bit the space engineer of anybody in that company. He didn't invent rockets. He didn't start SpaceX. Okay, in the same way he wasn't the founder of Tesla either. But he came in, and the things that he's done, his impact on it has been substantial. And all of the big decisions that are being made in SpaceX about what to do and where to go and stuff like that involve him. And it's very much his idea about make things simple, learn each time you're doing something, how do we make money off of it, the things that are important to him. So one is RID. The idea that you've got this iterative process. And, so for example, the number of times that he's been in orbit compared to his competitor has been in orbit once, he's been in orbit 1,000 times. So how much has he learned in 1,000 times? And the answer is a lot. The other is RUD, okay? RUD stands for Rapid Unscheduled Disassembly. And that's his way of saying it blew up, all right? And that happens with his stuff, And for other people, that would constitute failure. But someone once told him early in his career, they said, if you're not breaking things, then you're not learning enough, If you're not failing, if things aren't blowing up, then you're being too safe, or you're going in the wrong direction, or something like that. So obviously, if you keep blowing up for the same reasons, you're not learning anything, But that's not what happens with him. He has these rapid unscheduled disassemblies, and they're spectacular, but that whatever that thing is doesn't happen again. It blows up for a different reason next time. So his latest, this is the workhorse. I call the Falcon 9 kind of the Model T of spaceflight, all right? But his latest thing is Starship. So this is the thing that'll put like Starlink satellites up and take people to the International Space Station and things like that. But Musk has this idea. He wants life to be interplanetary. He believes that his company can create a colony on Mars, a self-sufficient colony on Mars. And if you think about it, that's a really, really hard thing to do. It's not just a function of getting to Mars, and actually getting to Mars, getting to the surface of Mars is harder than it is getting through the atmosphere of Mars is harder to do than getting through the atmosphere of either the Earth or the Moon. It's an odd thing because it has very thin atmosphere, but it does have atmosphere, and it's a planet about the size of the Earth. So about half of all of the things that have been sent to Mars end up failing. So it's actually pretty tough to get to Mars. And he's not just talking about getting to Mars, he's talking about creating a whole society there that is self-sufficient. Because right now, when I'm out of milk and eggs, I just jump in the car and 10 minutes later I'm at the big Y and we're good to go. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about dealing with, what do you do about water? What do you do about electricity? What do you do about radiation? What do you do about food? I mean, all that stuff has to be solved, right? So the basis of that is all going to be on something called his Starship, which is a lot bigger than this. It's like this big. And so this was the first Starship. This one, April of 2023. And I probably should have. It went into, one of the questions that they weren't sure whether they needed is normally when the rocket takes off, the engines are firing and there's all kinds of flame at the bottom. And he wasn't sure whether or not he needed like a flame diverter or a water suppression system or something like that. the Saturn V had a big flame trench, and they'd spray water, and they did the same thing with the shuttle. And he was thinking he might be able to get away without doing that, because he's really into the minimalist thing. So he's got his big rocket on the launch mount, and it starts taking off, and it just destroys the pad. I mean, there's pieces of concrete going all over the place, and damaged his tank farm, pretty much destroyed the launch pad. Big pieces of concrete ended up being thrust back up into the engines, destroying the engines. So when this thing took off, like half the engines were damaged, and it ended up like going out of control and blowing up. And it's like, now we're going to need to have like flame diverters and a water suppression system. So for the second one, and since then, he's got that all solved, right? He's moving on to something else. So that one kind of blew up. And then the second one was in November of 23, and I probably should have looked at this better. So this time, most of the engines worked, but it also kind of ended up going out of control for different reasons. And then the third flight, this is in March of last year, and we're getting better. I mean, the launch part is working, but the landing part, not quite right. This one was amazing. This was this flight in June, the fourth test flight. The plasma, when you're coming back into the atmosphere, when you're going very fast, just going through the air, there's a great deal of friction, and that friction creates heat. And so these spacecraft they're made out of stainless steel, okay? And if it gets so hot when something's coming into the atmosphere. Imagine if you were an asteroid, okay, which is a piece of rock, right? Well, when that rock comes into the atmosphere, it burns up, right? That's why you could see it, right? Because that rock is burning. It gets that hot. So you can imagine something like stainless steel, that's going to burn too, right? And that's why we have like these protective tiles on it. But apparently this hinge was a little bit too close to where the plasma field is, and it was burning a hole, and we didn't know if this hinge was going to fall off. And I remember it was like a nail biter, and it landed like a couple of seconds before the thing fell apart. So he's fixed it, right? He's moved this back a little bit. He's changed the configuration of things so that thing isn't happening anymore. This one was incredible. This was Flight 5. So he takes this booster, which is a lot bigger than this one. This is a 1/100th scale of the rocket, and he had the booster come back and he caught it. They call them chopsticks arms. So here's the launch tower, and it kind of came back and he caught it. All right. So now, since this thing is already here, you just have to fuel it, right, and send it off again. It's like pulling into your gate at the airport. You know, the airplane lands. You go ahead and you fuel it up. You put some more people on it. You get some more snacks, and then you go. So he's able to catch this thing, and that's the whole idea. You know, if you were to have this thing land on land, like a lot of these do, his Falcon 9s, they either land on the land, or he's got these autonomous barges that are out in the ocean, and it'll just land on that, and the barge will just bring it back. But you know, if you do that, then you have to pick up the rocket and put it on the stand. With this, it's like it's landing on the stand. I mean, it's phenomenal. And then this was Flight 6. This was in November, and here's the Starship. And they're not quite ready to catch the Starship yet. They've caught the booster. Now they've done that twice. And it was even more spectacular when they did it the second time. But they haven't quite worked this out yet. So they're actually like landing it on the water. They can't reuse it. I mean, it's going to be destroyed when that happens. But they're showing that they can do a pinpoint landing, and they're like getting ready for what they want to do. So this organization, SpaceX, it's not about building one piece of technology and building one rocket. They're building a factory that has a zillion rockets in it. I mean, they're building a rocket engine. Well, at this point, they're building at least one every single day, okay, maybe a couple a day. And for these other companies, they might build a rocket engine every 3 months, 5 months. I mean, the bottom of the of his big rocket takes 33 engines, and he's building a zillion of these things. You know, he's like building his own. It's like his own airline, right? You have a whole bunch of airplanes, and they all have engines, and that's what he's doing. He's got this whole star factory in Texas and also one in Florida. Now, Musk, in addition to being a brilliant engineer, he's also the richest man in the world. And he's buds with the president. And so one of the questions that I have in my mind is SpaceX had to have a relationship with the FAA. So anything that flies in or through the United States airspace has to have a license from the FAA. So, and if you have any problems, then they have to do an investigation. So you have to have a relationship between the U.S. government and private industry. You can't just decide you're going to launch rockets. So, so you have to have a good relationship with the government. And now his friend is president, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, how does that impact SpaceX? How does it impact his relationship with his competitors? I don't know. I mean, we'll see. But his idea is we're going to put these starships on Mars. And when he talks about flying people, like when the guys went to the moon, it was 3 seats. Okay, that's all you got. You got the commander, you got the lunar module pilot, and you got the command module pilot, and that's it. When he's talking about these things, we're talking about a couple of hundred seats in each one. It's like an airliner, okay, but it's a spacecraft, and he's already built them the size that it would take to put all these people in it. But we're on flight 7. Flight 7 is probably in the next couple of weeks. So what I wanted to talk about is a little bit about the person behind SpaceX, and this is Elon Musk. And see, these are some of the things that he's said, and I think they really kind of they explain some things about him. It says, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you're not innovating enough. There's a tremendous bias against taking risk. Everyone is trying to optimize their ass covering. It's okay to have your eggs in one basket, as long as you control what happens in that basket. I mean, think about his vertical integration, right? I mean, if he had to wait on someone to make some more spacesuits for him, and he's a dollar waiting on a dime, that could be a problem. But he's got this vertical integration. He controls the whole process. I don't spend my time pontificating on high concept things. I spend my time solving engineering and manufacturing problems. What makes innovative thinking happen? I think it's really a mindset. You have to decide. When Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, "No, what's wrong with a horse?" That was a huge bet he made, and it worked. And when I think of Elon Musk, I think of Henry Ford. Ford didn't invent the car, okay? But he fundamentally changed the idea that the car, that kind of a thing was just going to be a truck for business or was going to be something for wealthy people. All of a sudden, almost everybody in America could have their own car. And not that everybody's going to have their own Falcon 9, but the idea that 622 people are the only people that had ever been in space all the way up through 2019, that's about to change. So you see some pictures of people who I think have been fundamental visionaries. And here I've got Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and Elon Musk. So somebody like Thomas Edison, he famously said, "I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." So Edison's work ethic was legendary. He would often work 18 hours a day in his lab. So he didn't invent the light bulb, okay? But what was happening with the light bulb is the filament, the part that you get red hot and it would generate the light, kept burning out. So they were trying to come up with a filament that would last. You have a light bulb that lasted. And he came up with the first practical one. And that's where General Electric came from, okay? Brings, new ideas to light. And so he had this incredible work ethic. He had this tenacity. He was a very, very interesting thinker. He created all kinds of industries. I mean, the movie industry, the phonograph, the record player and stuff like that. That's Edison. He did all kinds of stuff. He had a big impact on astronomy, light bulbs, all kinds of things. And if you look at Musk, he's having an impact in lots of different areas. I mean, he made his money in the banking sector, okay, because he had PayPal. And he's working on artificial intelligence and something called Neuralink. And he's interested in transportation infrastructure because he's building tunnels underneath Los Angeles for mass transit. And it's called the Boring Company because he's got this boring thing, that bores holes. And then he's disrupting the automobile industry because instead of competing for internal combustion engines, he's making electric cars. So he's doing all these kinds of things. If it's Tesla or it's Boring or it's SpaceX, and if you talk to people that work at SpaceX, they'll tell you that if you're young and you have no family and you don't have a life and you want to be in the most exciting ride there is, you go and work for SpaceX. There's no work-life balance. The expectation is you're going to be there and working, and that's what Edison was, right? And if you look at Musk, that's what he does. He works like 18 hours a day, and he's always thinking, how can I do this different? And then you've got somebody like Henry Ford. And like I said, he didn't invent the car, but he had a profound impact on American society. And so for him, there was some principles. He had a commitment to innovation. His idea was producing affordable, high-quality cars, and he did that because he brought assembly line technology and used that in the automotive sense. So cars used to take many hours to put together. He got it down to 90 minutes. So every 90 minutes there was a new Model T that was running off the assembly line. So all of a sudden the price of cars went from thousands down to hundreds, right? And all of a sudden the average person can now own a car. And Henry Ford was really big into employee welfare too. So I look at this picture. This is a very, I think it's a very instructive picture about Musk. So you're looking at the Raptor, which he initially with his spacecraft he used a Merlin engine. Now he's using a Raptor. The Raptor's a lot more powerful, and the Raptor he has 33 of these on the base of the booster, and you can see the Raptor 1. It's got a whole bunch. This is actually the engine. This is just the bell where the exhaust gas comes out. But you can see how complicated that is. And this is the version 2, and he's gotten rid of a lot of stuff. This is version 3. He's constantly looking at stuff. He walks up to something and he says, "What is that for? Why do we need that? Why does it have to look like that? Can you do it a different way?" And the answer is many times you can. And so right now they're flying version 2s, and they'll be flying the version 3 even soon. It's not only more reliable, it's cheaper to produce, and yeah. So the kinds of things that when you talk to Musk, he's into the engineering challenges. He wants things to be rapidly reusable. The idea of an iterative design, just the idea that he went with stainless over composite. Everybody in the industry said you need something that's super strong, super lightweight. You need wrapped carbon composites, and you need to go with titanium, which is very, very difficult to fashion. And he's like, no, we'll just get some welders and we'll build some stainless steel stuff, and we'll blow them up and see what we learn from it, and we'll do better. And that's what he's doing. Very much into cost reduction, always looking at how can we do this cheaper. So much of the stuff with this is automated. So instead of sending a ship out with a bunch of people on it to go and get his rocket, it's an automated ship, and he's got these cars, and these cars could drive themselves. You don't have to put a person in them. And this spacecraft, this can go to the ISS, and it doesn't have to have people in it. He's always looking for ways to automate things, to make them less expensive, to make them more reliable. And he just has this focus on innovation. Having these drone ships. He's got something they call it a Pez dispenser. Anybody remember what a Pez was? Okay, so you'd pick up the head of Goofy and a little piece of candy would come out. Well, on his Starship, he's got a little door here that's going to open up, and like a Pez dispenser, it's going to kick out satellites. Satellites. So right now, when he puts one of these Falcon 9s up into space, it'll have 60 satellites all set up in here, and he'll open this thing up, and the satellites will go off and do their thing. And so this little Pez dispenser, and he's going to test this out this next month, is going to kick out the satellites as it goes out. So all kinds of different kinds of innovation. So here's a question: is failure an option? I don't know if people have seen the Ron Howard movie Apollo 13, where Gene Kranz is, he's trying to get the astronauts home after there's an explosion, and he says, failure is not an option. Well, maybe it's not an option when you're trying to save people's lives, okay? But in terms of how you advance technology, it's unclear whether failure is an option. So over on the left here, this is Ham. He was, before we sent up the astronauts, we sent up monkeys. Because we wanted to know physiologically, what would happen to an organism when you're accelerating them and doing this kind of stuff. And we're learning how to make the atmosphere in the capsule right and all this kind of stuff. So we used monkeys. And Wernher von Braun was a very, very meticulous engineer. And so he would have a component, and he would test it and learn everything about it, and then he'd bolt on another component and see how they interacted, and another one. So when they were doing these monkey flights, and there were 4 or 5 monkey flights, von Braun was pushing. He said, no, we need more monkey flights. And so the head of NASA said, well, how many do you need? He says, we're going to need at least 50. And the guy from NASA says, hey, look, we got into a race with the Russians, okay? They've already put a guy in orbit. We haven't done that yet. And we're busy sending up a couple of monkeys. He says, if we're smart, we'll just move our whole operation to Africa, because we're going to need to do that if we're going to send up 50 monkeys. So, that's, part of that mindset. You've got von Braun, who wants to understand every little thing about that and go slow and be meticulous. And you've got other people that are like, let's move forward. The other one I wanted to show you here is the most successful experimental aircraft the U.S. has ever had, called the X-15. And I had a chance to talk to some of the guys that worked on the X-15, and I said, why was your program so much more successful than other airplanes? And there's got to be something about the program. And they said, well, we were a very small group of people, maybe about 50 people. And at the end of the flight, you could be in the hangar with the pilot would be sitting there, and the flight director would be sitting there, and the guy who was in the rocket shop would be there, and they'd all be discussing what they needed and what they thought, and their impressions and all this kind of stuff. And you had this wonderful feedback and this whole iterative process, right? Because each time they flew the plane, they'd learned something from last week, and they were doing things a little bit different, and they got a little bit better. So, sometimes when a program gets to be enormous, like the Boeing Starlifter program, you might spend a year just designing the T-shirts, when really you need to be out there learning, getting data, getting telemetry. So then when they asked von Braun, when they finally got to the moon, about what he thought about his fights with George Miller about whether you should have 50 monkey flights, he said, in retrospect, it's clear that without all-ups testing, the first manned lunar landing could not have taken place as early as 1969. It sounds reckless, but George Miller, his reasoning was impeccable, which was hard for von Braun to say about anybody. So there's this question about all-up versus iterative testing. About those two concepts. One, all-up is when you put all kinds of things together and you test it. And this is what George Miller was looking for. He says, you got the Saturn V and you got all these different pieces and you just put them all together and you fire it up and see how it goes. Well, if it works, that's great, okay? If it doesn't work, why did it not work? You may not understand all those interrelationships. You may have so little data that you don't know why it blew up. So there's a risk associated with doing all-up testing. But the determination of NASA during the Apollo program was we needed to do all-up testing or we would never get to the moon. And that's probably the case. Sometimes you have to take that risk. So the risks associated with all-up testing is if the thing keeps blowing up and you don't really understand why, you could have project cancellation. There are people who are always ready to pull the funding on something. They say, look, it blew up. We don't need it anymore. Get rid of it. You could misunderstand the results. You could have a loss of public support. You could have increased costs because you're not really learning in relation to how much money you're spending. But the rewards of all-up testing is that you can get to the finish line first, and that you get a lot of parallel flight data. You're learning things about different components on the flight at the same time. And you might be able to increase your market share. So you've got somebody like Musk who is doing all of this all-up testing and iterative testing, and he's cornered the market, the space market. He's done a remarkable job. So the future of spaceflight, all right? The number of new spacecraft that are being developed and tested, okay, in this time frame, in the next 2 or 3 years or so. Currently, let me say currently, is about 7. There are 7 different companies that are developing rockets and things like that, including the Block 1 of the Starship. In the next couple of years, and by couple I mean 2, 3, 4 years, there are 72 different ones. Okay, 72 different companies and new designs and new spacecraft and stuff like that.
Companies where?
All over the country.
Not the world.
Most of the stuff is happening here. There are other countries that are involved in spacecraft design and flying, but not a lot. Not a lot. Most of the innovation, most of the building is here. And to me, that's just breathtaking. The idea that, first of all, having 7 of them being done right now is a lot compared to what it was 5 years ago. But the idea that 2 or 3 years from now it's going to be 72 is just remarkable. And that's what I got for you.